Reconciling the economy with the ecology is one of the great challenges of our generation. There are economic activities that are high carbon and there are those that are low carbon. So our real challenge is to think strategically about how to transition from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy. There are quite a few old ways of doing things that are high carbon that are actually not as competitive economically as the new ways of doing things. So we look at cattle ranching. One of the worst offenders in terms of carbon emissions across the tropical world is extensive cattle ranching, chopping down an entire forest to put a couple cows on a pasture. There are much better ways, much smarter ways, much more efficient ways of producing beef and dairy than that. And to do so in a way that also conserves the forest, it's a win-win. And actually it's not reforestation, although there's a lot of potential for reforesting. It's avoiding the deforestation in the first place. That's still, throughout Latin America, that's the #1 contributor from land use to carbon emissions. And economically, it's relatively insignificant in all the economies. So it should be an area where the governments, the private sector can say, hey, we can actually accomplish good emission reductions in this area without sacrificing economic growth. Setting the goals is the first step, actually implementing them is the next step. But honestly, I think the countries of Latin America, following Mexico's example, sending a strong signal to the countries of the world for the 2016 COP in Paris, I think that sends a very strong message that this can be done, that the developing countries aren't the obstacle to this, that they're actually committed to making the changes necessary. They do need funding, so there should be international funding available to finance this transition. But it's not a lack of political will. That's the signal the Latin American countries can send. It starts with a cadastro, so actually a registry of who the landowners are and what they own. Another important part is zoning, which the government has a fundamental role in, identifying what are the areas for intensified production and what are the areas that should not be going into production that should be protected. And the third part is adjusting your subsidies to whatever the zoning and the registry says. So that you actually pay people to protect a forest over here, and you can pay over here for a rancher to intensify their production, move to a new system. Subsidies and licensing procedures, they end up driving a lot of behavior. If one company chooses to do everything the right way, but then does not benefit from that at the time of the licensing, and the company that cuts the corner gets the bid, then of course the system is wrong, the incentives are wrong, and you won't get the behavior that you want. Yes, there are going to be some tough decisions down the road as we transition to a true low carbon green economy, but there's some low-hanging fruit now that we can go after, and that interestingly, not just governments, there's a lot of private sector activity, private equity groups that are looking at how can they become part of financing this transition from the old economy to the new economy, because the new economy actually makes more money.